How does a life begin again when it has already been broken once? That question hangs in the frozen morning air of Redstone as the year turns, as the lanterns from last night's faded celebration flicker weakly in the wind. The frontier market sits at the edge of the town like a forgotten outpost, where dust replaces laughter and no one lingers unless they must. The new year has arrived, but hope has not. And in the center of that barren space stands a young woman, wrapped in nothing more than a thin blanket, like a secret the town refuses to claim. She is trembling, from cold, from exhaustion, from the unbearable weight of being left behind. Yet somehow, she still stands straight, as if dignity is the last thing she has left, and she refuses to let it fall. Her bare feet press into the frozen dirt. Her eyes are empty in a way that makes people uncomfortable. So they look away. They walk past. They do not ask where she came from or why she remains. They simply avoid her, because noticing her would make them responsible. And responsibility is expensive out here. The vendor who left her, a man whose face the town barely registers, is gone. Hours ago, he walked away, leaving her like an unwanted parcel. No one follows, no one questions. She is not worth the trouble. The wind whips across the market, lifting the edge of the blanket as she clutches it tighter. Somewhere, a sign creaks. A dog barks. The world continues. And then Daniel Hayes rides in. He arrives the way he does everything, quietly. His horse's hooves press soft prints into the frozen soil. Daniel is not the kind of man who demands attention. Years of loss have carved a stillness into him, the kind born from learning that speaking rarely changes what hurts. He comes to town only when necessary, and he plans to leave as soon as his saddlebags are full. But then he notices the way the wind curves around the still figure in the center of the square. He notices how the people angle their bodies away from her, and he notices her eyes, not pleading, not dramatic, simply hollow, the kind of hollow that says the world has already taken everything. He stops walking. For a moment, the town fades. It is only him and her. She is shivering so violently that he can almost feel it in his bones. Purple marks whisper up her skin. Her lips are pale. She tightens the thin blanket as though it might hold the pieces of her together. No one speaks. No one steps forward. Daniel does. He does not ask permission. He simply removes his wool coat and drapes it around her shoulders. The fabric is heavy, warm, immediate. Her fingers brush his by accident. They are ice cold. She looks up at him, not with hope, not with gratitude, but with a stunned kind of awareness, as if she cannot remember the last time someone touched her without intent. And then the vendor returns. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't explain. He simply states, in a tone stripped of humanity, that if Daniel intends to take her, there is a price. The silence deepens. Daniel does not argue. He does not ask why. He reaches into his pocket, pulls out the coins, and places them down like a quiet verdict. The moment is not grand. It is not heroic. It is simply necessary. The vendor shrugs, takes the money, and disappears back into the landscape like the shadow he is. Daniel turns to the woman. "Come on," he says gently, as if speaking to someone who has forgotten language. She hesitates, not because she doubts him, but because trust has become a foreign country she no longer visits. Still, she moves. He helps her onto the horse, careful not to crowd her. Then he walks beside the animal rather than mounting, letting her have the higher ground, the safer view. They leave Redstone without farewell. No one stops them. No one cares enough to. The road out of town is long and quiet. Frost glitters along the path as the sun rises, weak and thin. The wind slides between them. Daniel does not ask questions. He has learned that sometimes silence is the kindest language. He can feel the heaviness around her like a second blanket. A girl who has been passed from hand to hand. A person who has been treated like a thing. He thinks of his own losses, of the people buried by time, and something old inside him shifts. She sits straight on the horse, but her body tells the truth. Weariness, fear. relief she doesn't yet trust. And then the land opens into a quiet valley where a small cabin waits, not grand, not impressive, simply steady. Smoke curls from the chimney, a place built for survival, and maybe for peace. Daniel stops the horse, helps her down with careful hands, and leads her inside. The cabin smells of wood smoke and simple meals. He shows her the basin, the bed, the stove. Not with ownership, with respect. He ladles stew into a bowl and sets it before her, then sits by the fire rather than watching her eat, because watching would turn kindness into something else. The room is warm. The light is soft. The year has only just begun. And somehow, without fanfare, without promise, everything changes. Morning settles slowly over the valley, the light pale and hesitant, as if it too is unsure whether it is welcome here. Inside the cabin, the fire has burned down to a warm glow, wrapping the room in a faint amber hush. Daniel moves quietly, the way a man does when he has lived alone long enough for silence to become a companion. He pours water into the basin, sets folded cloth nearby, and steps away, leaving space around every gesture, as though space itself is part of the offering. The woman sits on the edge of the bed, still wrapped in his coat. She holds the fabric like a lifeline, unsure whether to relax or run. The cabin feels safe, and that alone is terrifying. Safety is not something she remembers trusting. She studies the walls, the simple shelves, the tools neatly arranged, the careful order that reveals the man more clearly than words ever could. Everything has a place. Everything is steady. Everything is honest. When Daniel speaks, his voice is low and even. Water's warm enough. Take your time. Then he steps outside, letting the door close gently behind him, as though anything louder might break something fragile he doesn't want to risk losing. Outside, frost still clings stubbornly to the grass. Daniel busies himself with the ordinary rhythm of chores, feeding the horse, checking the fence, splitting wood. The work grounds him, but his mind returns again and again to the stranger now resting under his roof. He does not regret the coins he handed over. He does not resent her presence, but he is aware, sharply, that the air inside the cabin has changed. Not in a way that threatens, in a way that unsettles the stillness of his heart. Inside, she washes slowly, reverently, as if relearning what it means to care for herself. The water stings her chilled skin, but she presses forward, letting the past few days rinse away in small, careful motions. She listens to the fire crackle. She listens to the quiet. She realizes she is not afraid of the silence. That is new. When Daniel returns, he knocks lightly before stepping in. She is sitting at the table now, hands folded, eyes lowered. He sets out bread and dried fruit for breakfast, not saying much, and she eats in small bites, like someone who has had to ration both food and hope. There is no interrogation, no demand, no bargain waiting to be revealed. He simply sits nearby, sharing the same space, letting trust grow in increments too small to measure. The day unfolds with a gentle steadiness. Daniel needs to repair the hinge on the barn door. He tells her she is free to stay inside, or come along if she wishes. The choice is simple, but choices, for her, have long been illusions. So when she nods and follows him outside, something inside her shifts. The cold air brushes her cheeks. The hills roll quietly under a slate sky. The world, for the first time in years, does not seem like a cage. She watches him work. His movements are practical, deliberate, unhurried. The metal creaks, wood splinters, nails meet hammer, all ordinary sounds, but to her they feel like the heartbeat of a life that might one day feel like hers too. She gathers fallen branches without being asked. It feels good to be useful, not commanded, not expected, simply contributing. Daniel notices. He doesn't praise loudly. He doesn't make it a moment. He simply nods, a quiet acknowledgement that tells her he sees her. And that is enough. Her body loosens, her eyes soften. She breathes deeper. The day passes in the rhythm of shared work, small tasks, quiet steps, a fragile companionship that grows in silence. Sometimes he speaks. Simple things. The weather, the land, the way the river swells every spring. She listens, letting his voice fill the empty spaces inside her without demanding anything in return. As the sun dips low, the valley blushes in fading gold. Smoke rises from the chimney. The cabin welcomes them back. She prepares the stove the way she watched him do the night before, careful, precise, wanting to honor the space she has been allowed to inhabit. He notices the ease in her hands and says softly, "You're stronger than you think." She doesn't answer, but she hears it, and she holds it. After supper, the fire glows brighter, warding off the deep winter chill. He sets a blanket near the bed again and takes the chair by the stove. She hesitates this time, glancing toward him. He reassures her before she can ask, "You sleep. I'll be fine here." It is not sacrifice. It is respect. Trust hangs in the air like a fragile thread. She lies down slowly. Her mind races, not with terror, not with loneliness, but with something new, something steady, something dangerously close to hope. Outside, the wind sighs against the cabin. Inside, the year feels like a door, quietly opening. And though neither of them says it aloud, both sense the same truth forming in the stillness between them. Two lives, once steeped in isolation, are beginning to share the same quiet firelight. Not as savior and saved, not as owner and possession, but as two human beings learning, cautiously, to exist side by side. She falls asleep more easily than she expected, the coat still wrapped around her like a promise. Daniel remains awake longer, listening to the crackle of the fire, watching the shadows shift across the floor. He doesn't understand yet what is changing. He only knows that the cabin no longer feels quite as empty, and that, despite every reason to stay distant, he feels strangely grateful for the sound of another steady breath in the room. The new year settles deeper into the valley. Winter holds the land firm, and inside a small wooden cabin, trust, fragile, hesitant, trembling, opens its eyes for the first time. Winter settles into the valley with a quieter certainty now, the cold no longer feeling like an enemy so much as a presence that simply exists alongside them. The snow deepens in the higher ridges. The creek slows beneath thin glass layers of ice, and the sky hangs low and pale, as if the world has been reduced to only this cabin, this firelight, these two lives learning how to breathe again. Days pass in a rhythm that feels almost deliberate. Daniel wakes before dawn, stirring the coals, adding wood to the stove, stepping outside to greet the morning with quiet practicality. She wakes later, wrapped in his coat, the echoes of old nightmares fading faster now than before. She listens to the way his footsteps return across the porch. She listens to the kettle whistle softly, and for the first time in years, she begins to believe that waking up is not something to fear. They speak little at first. Their silence is not an absence, but a truce, a shared understanding that words will come when they are ready. Sometimes, while Daniel cuts wood or checks the fence line, she walks a small circle around the cabin, learning the shape of the land like someone memorizing a map to a new life. The valley feels different than anywhere she has been before. Not trapped, not watched, not owned, free. And yet, the shadows of her past still cling. They flicker at the edge of her peace like ghosts, waiting for the moment she loses her footing. One evening, as snow drifts begin to form along the porch and the fire burns steady, Daniel sits at the table smoothing a scrap of wood into some small, shapeless carving. She sits nearby, hands around a warm mug, eyes distant. The silence that fills the room feels heavier tonight. Not frightening, just full. He senses it. He does not push. He has learned that certain doors only open if you stand far enough away. Finally, she speaks. Her voice is low, as if afraid of shattering the fragile safety they have built. "I don't even remember the first time they changed my name," she says. The words fall into the quiet like stones into still water. Daniel does not look up immediately. He lets the meaning settle. Then, gently, he nods. "You don't have to tell me," he replies. "I know." But she continues anyway, because something inside her has finally decided it no longer wants to live in silence. She tells him about being taken, not with anger, but with a kind of exhausted detachment, like someone reciting a story she has told herself too many times. She was young. She did not understand. And after a while, she stopped trying to. There were new places, new hands, new rules. Every time she began to answer to one name, it was taken away and replaced with another, until eventually she stopped answering at all. She stopped believing she belonged anywhere. Daniel listens. He does not ask questions. He does not fill the silence with empty comfort. His presence is quiet and solid, like the cabin walls around them. When she struggles to continue, he waits. When she falters, he lets the silence hold her rather than letting her fall. She does not cry. There are no tears left. There is only the truth of being erased again and again until she no longer recognized herself. "I don't know who I am anymore," she admits finally. The admission comes out small, fragile, and honest. Daniel sets down the carving. He looks at her fully then, not with pity, not with shock, but with deep, steady understanding. "You don't have to know yet," he says. "You'll find it again, in your own time." She studies him, searching for judgment, for expectation, for the price behind the kindness. But there is none. Only sincerity. Only respect. The fire softens the corners of the room. Outside, the wind brushes the valley like a distant voice. Inside, something heavy loosens in her chest. Over the next days, she speaks more freely, not all at once, and never when pushed, but slowly, in small pieces that fit together like the fragments of a broken mirror being set gently back into place. She tells him about the long hours of work, about doing what she was told, because the alternative was unthinkable. She tells him about nights where she dreamed of running, only to wake up and realize there was nowhere to go. She tells him about forgetting what it felt like to be seen as a person. Daniel never interrupts. He works with his hands while she speaks, repairing a tool handle, mending a strap, but his attention never wanders. Sometimes he shares small things in return. He talks about the losses he rarely voices, about the family buried beneath the cold earth of distant hills. Not much, not dramatic, but enough to remind her that pain is not foreign to him either, and that this connection is not one-sided. As the winter deepens, their interactions shift. Not dramatically, not with declarations, but in subtle ways. The way she washes the dishes after meals without thinking twice. The way he leaves a cup of tea at her side when she looks tired. The way the cabin no longer feels divided into his space and hers. It simply becomes theirs. One afternoon, while snow begins drifting down in slow, patient flakes, she pauses at the doorway and watches Daniel work outside. His breath fogs in the cold. His movements are steady, unhurried, dependable. Something warm flickers through her chest, unfamiliar and dangerous. Not ownership, not gratitude. Something deeper, something that feels suspiciously like belonging. That evening, when they sit beside the fire, she finally finds the courage to ask the question that has haunted her. "Why didn't you ask me who I was?" Daniel looks into the flames, then at her. "Because you're here now," he answers simply. And that's enough. It is not a grand speech. It is not poetry, but it is the most powerful truth she has heard in years. For the first time, she allows herself to consider the possibility that identity is not something others decide, but something she can reclaim. Perhaps slowly, perhaps painfully, but freely. The days stretch forward. The snow thickens. The world narrows to the cabin, the valley, the sound of Daniel's boots on the porch, the warmth of the fire, the quiet cadence of 2 breaths in the same safe room. And in that quiet, a fragile new certainty begins to grow. She is not invisible anymore. She is not property. She is not a nameless shadow drifting from one cruel hand to the next. She is someone rebuilding herself, piece by fragile piece, in a place where no one will take that away again. Daniel feels it too. The shift in the air, the tenderness in the way she moves now, the calm settling into his own bones. 2 broken lives, slowly shaping into something whole. Not through rescue, not through obligation, but through the simple, powerful act of listening without judgment. Outside, winter continues its long grip on the valley. Inside, a different kind of warmth takes root. One that does not fade with the fire. One that feels like the beginning of something neither of them dares to name yet. But they both feel it. And they both know that whatever comes next will no longer be faced alone. The valley does not change quickly, but the way they live inside it does. Winter holds its steady grip. Yet the cold feels less sharp now, softened by routine, by warmth, by the sense that neither of them is moving through the world alone anymore. Days begin to stretch into one another with a rhythm that feels unforced, natural, like the slow breathing of the land itself. Daniel wakes early, as always, stirring the fire and stepping outside to greet the frost-lined morning. She wakes a little later, not in panic now, but in quiet awareness, listening to the familiar sounds that have become anchors in her day. The creak of the door, the rustle of wood, the kettle warming. She wraps herself in his coat, not because she must, but because it feels like safety, like belonging. They work together now, not because anyone has asked them to, but because it feels right. She prepares the stove before sunrise, arranging kindling with careful hands. He steps in afterward, noticing the glow already lifting the chill from the air. He nods, appreciative but never performative. She doesn't need applause. What she needs is exactly what he gives. Steady acknowledgement, quiet respect. Outside, they repair the sagging gate one afternoon, the metal hinge refusing to sit straight. Daniel shows her how to hold the wood, how to brace it without straining. She learns quickly, not afraid to try, not afraid to fail. When the gate finally swings properly, she smiles, not wide, not loud, but full and real. "Feels good to fix something," she says. Daniel meets her eyes. "You've been doing that since you got here." She doesn't reply, but his words stay with her. Inside the cabin, changes appear slowly. She wipes the shelves, organizes what little food they have, sweeps dust from corners long ignored. Not to erase Daniel's life, but to join it. The cabin no longer looks like a temporary shelter. It looks lived in, shared. One evening, as snow drifts along the porch and the world outside disappears into white silence, Daniel pauses at the doorway and watches her by the fire. She isn't aware he's looking. She braids her hair loosely, then folds the blanket with gentle precision. Something in his chest tightens. Not painful, but unexpected. She belongs here. Not because he brought her, but because she has chosen to exist fully within this space. He sets down the wood he's collected. She glances up, offering a small, calm smile. That moment, quiet, unspoken, real, fills the room more than conversation ever could. They begin to talk more in the evenings, though still with restraint, still with respect for silence. She asks about the land, about the seasons, about the creek when the snow melts. He tells her. She listens. Sometimes he shares pieces of his past, the people he loved, the ones he lost, the emptiness that followed. She does not pity him, she simply understands. And that is enough. Unspoken affection threads itself through the simple gestures of daily life. She warms his coffee without being asked. He leaves gloves by the door so her hands will not freeze. she learns to start the fire before dawn. He checks the door twice each night, not from fear, but from instinct. The instinct of a man who now feels responsible for more than just himself. Outside, the valley stretches endless and calm. Inside, the cabin hums softly with the presence of two lives learning how to weave together. Trust becomes normal. Safety becomes familiar. And hope, cautious, fragile hope, begins to feel less like danger and more like truth. One afternoon, she carries water back from the creek. The bucket is heavy, but she walks steadily. Daniel meets her halfway, not to take the load from her, but to share it. Their hands brush on the handle. Neither pulls away quickly. The contact is brief, but the warmth of it lingers long after the water is poured. That evening, as they sit watching the fire, she says softly, "It doesn't feel like I'm waiting anymore." Daniel looks at her, curious. Waiting for what? She thinks for a moment, searching for the right words. "To leave," she says, "or to be taken away again." He nods slowly, absorbing the weight of that confession. He doesn't press. He doesn't promise. He simply sits beside her in the glow of the firelight, close enough that she can feel the quiet reassurance of his presence. She realizes then that her body no longer holds fear like a constant tension. Her shoulders rest naturally. Her eyes lift more easily. And when she laughs, rare, soft, almost shy, it sounds like something rediscovered rather than borrowed. Daniel hears it, and he treasures it. The nights grow longer. Sometimes winter storms sweep across the valley, rattling the cabin walls and howling at the windows. But inside, the fire burns bright, and the sound of the wind becomes background rather than threat. She sews a tear in his coat one night, her fingers numb from the cold water she used earlier to wash it near the creek. When she returns inside, Daniel notices the redness of her hands and guides them gently toward the fire. He doesn't speak at first. He doesn't need to. His gesture says enough. She watches him while the flames restore warmth to her skin. There is no demand in his eyes, no expectation, just care, simple, honest, unwavering. She realizes then that what binds them is not debt, not power, not desperation. It is choice, and choice, for her, is everything. Before sleep, he takes the chair by the stove as always, though sometimes she catches him drifting into rest with his head tilted forward. Once, she places a blanket over his shoulders without waking him. For a moment, she stands there watching him breathe, and she feels an ache in her chest that is neither fear nor sorrow. It is tenderness, a feeling long denied, a feeling finally allowed to exist. As the new year deepens, the cabin changes not in structure, but in spirit. It is no longer simply Daniel's home, it is theirs, though neither says it aloud. The shared tasks, the shared silences, the shared warmth. All of it weaves into something that feels steady, enduring, quietly profound. And beneath it all lies a simple truth neither is ready to speak, yet both understand completely. What began as refuge has become a life, not forced, not bargained, but chosen. Outside, the land sleeps under winter's watchful eye. Inside, two hearts learn the rhythm of staying. And in that staying, something like love, unspoken, patient, deeply human, begins to take shape. The sky lightens earlier now, as if the valley itself is growing more willing to trust the promise of morning. Winter still rests heavy on the land, but the fierce edge of its cold has softened. Life inside the cabin flows in quiet steadiness, like breath, shared, unhurried, real. She wakes one soft gray morning and realizes that fear is no longer the first thing she feels. Instead, there is the warmth of the fire, the scent of wood smoke, and the peaceful certainty that she is safe. Daniel tells her he will need to ride into Redstone before the week ends. Supplies are low. The trip is necessary. She nods, and she means to answer calmly, but something inside her shifts, heavy and uncertain. Not dread, not terror, just the sharp awareness that the peace she feels now is anchored to his presence. She spends the days before his departure moving through the cabin with extra care. She tidies the shelves, folds the blankets, sweeps the floor, all without needing to be asked. These are not chores. They are choices. And choices still surprise her with their quiet power. When the day comes, he saddles the horse in silence. The winter sun hovers low, washed pale by the chill. She stands beside the porch steps, wrapped in his coat, watching him tie the last strap. He does not tell her to stay inside. He does not caution her. He simply says, "I'll be back by nightfall." She nods. "I know." The words feel fragile. He hesitates a moment longer, as if there is more he could say, then mounts the horse and starts down the road. She watches until he disappears between the trees, swallowed by the valley's distant hush. The silence that follows is different than before, not threatening, but weighty. The cabin feels larger without him, and she moves through it slowly, listening to its stillness. She keeps herself busy. She gathers kindling. She stokes the fire. She cooks a simple meal, but her mind drifts again and again to the road leading back to Redstone. She realizes that she is not afraid he will not return. She is afraid of how much it would matter if he didn't. By the time the sky begins to fade into evening, the sound of hooves finally breaks the quiet. Relief washes through her so deeply that she has to steady herself against the doorframe. Daniel dismounts, carrying more than just supplies. In his arms is a small wrapped bundle. He sets the sacks aside and steps into the cabin, the cold trailing after him until the fire claims the room again. For a moment, he simply looks at her. Not in gratitude, not in claim, but with a softness she has come to recognize, though neither of them names it. "I brought something," he says quietly. He places the bundle on the table and unwraps it with deliberate care. Inside lies a simple dress, soft fabric in muted color, practical but beautiful in its own honest way. Beneath it, a pair of worn but sturdy shoes, and then a small wooden box. He opens it slowly. Inside rests a plain tin ring, unpolished, humble, shining with the sincerity of a life lived simply. She stares at it, breath caught in her chest. Daniel does not kneel. He does not make grand speeches. That has never been his way. He simply meets her eyes and speaks with the same calm steadiness he has shown since the first moment he wrapped his coat around her shoulders. "You don't owe me anything," he says. "You never have. And I don't want you here because you think you do. But if this place feels like home, if you want to stay, not because you must, but because you choose to, then I would be honored to share that life with you." The words fall into the room with quiet certainty. No pressure, no ownership, only truth, only choice. She stands still for a long moment, heart beating like footsteps across open ground. All the fragments of her past rise and settle. The names taken from her, the places she never chose, the years she survived rather than lived. And then she looks at Daniel, at the lines of quiet strength in his face, at the gentleness he carries without effort, at the safety he never demanded anything in exchange for. She steps closer, not in fear, not in hesitation, but with clarity. "I don't want to go anywhere," she says softly. "Not now, not ever." His breath leaves him in a slow exhale, as though he too has been waiting to feel this sure. He lifts the ring from its box and takes her hand with care, like something precious. The metal is cool at first, then warm against her skin. When he slides it onto her finger, there is no ceremony, no witnesses, only firelight, only winter quiet beyond the walls, only two lives quietly binding themselves to a shared future. He does not kiss her hand. He does not draw her close in sudden passion. Their bond has never needed theatrics. Instead, they simply stand together, letting the moment exist exactly as it is. Simple, honest, whole. Later, they sit by the fire. Her hand rests in his, not out of uncertainty, but out of the deep, steady comfort of belonging. The cabin no longer feels temporary. It feels like a promise. Outside, night settles over the valley, calm and unbroken. Inside, the fire burns warm and steady, the light touching the walls as though blessing them. Two souls who once faced the world alone now share the same quiet breath, the same fragile hope, the same chosen life. When sleep finally comes, it feels less like escape and more like peace. She closes her eyes knowing she will wake in the same place, beside the same man, with the same certainty. And Daniel, listening to the soft cadence of her breathing, allows himself a rare and quiet smile. The new year stretches ahead of them, unknown, imperfect, real. But whatever it brings, they will face it together. Not because fate demanded it, not because desperation forced it, but because each of them chose to stay. And in a world that once took everything from them, that choice is the greatest kind of freedom. The fire softens to a glowing hush, and the valley outside settles into the deep, restful quiet of night. Two lives that once wandered alone now rest beneath the same wooden roof, wrapped not in grand promises, but in the simple, steady truth of choosing one another. Their bond is gentle, built from patience and respect, from kindness freely given and trust slowly earned. The winter air presses softly against the windows, but inside there is only warmth, only the comfort of knowing that tomorrow will not be faced alone. Her hand rests lightly in his. The cabin, once silent, now breathes with shared life. And somewhere in that stillness, the past loosens its grip, allowing hope to lay down roots. The story does not end with thunder or applause, but with the quiet certainty of belonging. Let the picture fade now, slow and tender, as the fire dims and the night grows deep. Rest easy. Everything is peaceful here. End of article. Good night.